Earlier this week, I was looking at just the differences between like urban legends, folklore, and mythology. And what I figured out is folklore is like the umbrella term for all of those stories. So urban legends and myth are both folklore.
Mhm.
And then an urban legend is any kind of story that is typically orally told and is said to be true but isn't. And then mythology is usually literature that's been passed down that is, again, just a story as well. But that's like for me, the biggest separation between like urban legend and myth was urban legend is almost exclusively orally told, whereas mythology is written and has more like literature backing it up. But yeah, I don't know why I was looking into that. It's just I noticed with like a light theme we have here with our past episodes being urban legends and whatnot. So I wanted to look more into urban legends, I guess.
And you didn't include pseudo history in that?
I did not. What is pseudo history?
Pseudo history. It treats myths, legends, sagas, and similar literature as literal truth.
Oh, yeah,
Because I was going to go into the King Arthur as an example of that.
that's a cool
Of
one.
pseudo history. Yeah. Because it started with Welsh poetry. That's when Arthur's first seen. Welsh poetry back in, I don't know, earlier than the 15th century. It was like 1136 or something is what I looked at.
Nice.
But it started as Welsh poetry. That's when the first figure, and obviously we still have stuff today coming out about King Arthur.
Mhm.
There was a movie a couple years ago, and before that movie there was another movie and another movie, and there's a bunch of stories on Camelot and stuff, and it's all considered pseudo history. And the basic story of King Arthur is, it starts with Uther Pendragon, who gets Merlin's help to sleep with the wife of a duke. Merlin, the wizard, turns Pendragon into a likeness of her husband, and he sleeps with her, and then that's the night King Arthur was born, or conceived, not born. And then King Arthur, everyone knows the stories. It's about bravery, and there's magic elements to it.
The sword and the stone.
The sword and the stone. I forgot about the sword and the stone, but yeah, the sword and the stone. Wizards, dragons, witches, giants. And it's considered pseudo history. But a lot of people try and make the argument that King Arthur was a real person. The Earl of Cornwall was so consumed with the idea that Arthur was real that in May 1233, he traded 3 prime estates that he had for a treeless headland and built a castle on it that had no particular function. And he did it to anchor his position in the legend. And he said he claimed to be the successor of Arthur.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
I was
funny.
reading that on the Smithsonian article, and it was crazy.
That is crazy.
Just to put himself in the legend.
Yeah.
That's like why he
The
did
successor.
it. Like,
Yeah, that's
talk about
that is
somebody
crazy.
who's got an ego. But I think another opinion is the reason people like the Arthurian myths and legends and stories are because there's something for everyone in it. There's the courtly love, the magic, and then the martial bravery that have been told and retold. So I just thought that was cool because I hadn't really heard, like, I've heard of pseudo history, but I haven't really looked at the definition. And it's when those legends and myths are told like they're the literal truth.
Another example of pseudo history that, with you explaining that I thought of is the story of the Trojan horse.
Yes,
That's another one because there's been a lot of argument that was a true story. But I believe that event was baked in. Was it in the Odyssey?
I believe it's Greek mythology.
Yeah, it's one of the Greek mythology
Yeah.
ones. But I remember like hearing that argument a lot, that that battle actually happened. The Greeks did in
Hmm.
fact build a horse and hide in it and do all of that. They recently found Troy, so they know Troy was a real place,
Yeah.
and it was exactly where the book described it was. But have
I
you
mean,
ever?
sometimes I feel like some of those tales could be true.
Yeah,
Maybe his name wasn't Arthur, but maybe there was this brave person who like was just a monster in battle.
yeah.
And then the rumors started,
The
you know
rumors
how any
started. Yeah,
story changes over time. So I saw him kill a giant. Oh, well, he slayed a bunch of witches. Well, let's look at New England and how easy it was to slay witches then
no, I
too.
know
Like,
how easy it was for a story to get off the rails.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because we were watching something the other day where it's same thing. Oh, it was the Band of Brothers. We mentioned it the last time, but where they're like, I already killed all 5. Then
Mhm.
it became like 50 POWs by the end. We don't
Yeah.
have to retell that because we told it in our last one, but
That's the problem
yeah.
with oral traditions. It's like telephone. Every time it
Mhm.
changes as it gets passed down. But have you ever read this? I have this mythology textbook. I took a mythology class in college, and I kept the textbook because I just liked the book. But they have a King Arthur in this
Mhm.
book as well, like the whole story. It's not bad. Actually, I might be mistaken. Either way, I was looking at this book earlier, and when I let me ask you this: when you were has I know Greek mythology is your favorite mythology. Is that correct?
I'd say so, yeah.
Has it always been your favorite?
I think that's why it's my favorite. Is it's the one I've known for the longest.
Yeah, same. Greek mythology is
I
also
think
my
that's where
favorite.
I'm most well versed in.
Yep.
Is Greek mythology.
Yep. Greek mythology is also my favorite. What got me into it was there was this bookstore over in Newburyport, Mass, around where I grew up, and my dad would bring me there like all the time to like get books because they liked that I liked reading.
Hmm.
And I got this. It was a book that was like for early level readers, so
Hmm.
like third, fourth grade level reading, and it was the Odyssey. And there was, I think there was like 5 books in the series, but it was the story of the Odyssey at like a lower reading level.
Yeah,
And I
because if
remember
you try and read the Iliad and the Odyssey,
in fourth grade,
I in
at
fourth
that,
grade I'm 31, and
yeah,
I try and read it now, and I'm like,
yeah, it's hard to
oh
read.
my god, I'm like looking up words every 5 seconds, trying to be like, wait,
Yeah,
what does that mean? It's really well written. It's confusing too because it's almost like a poetry type thing.
yeah,
I'm not strong with poetry.
yep. So that was really my first introduction to like Greek mythology. But like you just said, that was my not just Greek mythology. I think mythology in general.
Mhm.
That was my first like introduction to that, and that's why it's kind of always been my favorite. Now, I will say, in right around that time when I was getting into Greek mythology, the movie 300 also came out. Like it was right around the time 300 was coming out, and like so Greek mythology was kind of in pop culture at the time, similar to
Mhm.
how Viking mythology and Norse mythology
It's
is in pop culture
today,
today.
yeah. Well,
So,
Vikings did a good
yeah.
job with that series, even though the history doesn't line up.
Oh yeah.
But they made the history work to make a show and not drag it out.
Yeah. What I will say though is I do think a lot of the people that get super into Norse mythology because that are just fanboys of the show, it kind of does make me cringe a little bit. But also, like a fascinating thing that I learned in this textbook is about Norse mythology. There was different
Mhm.
sects of Norse mythology, and they had kind of the same structure, and they all worshipped the same thing. It was like they had like a war god, and they did the rituals and all of that. But they had different gods that they worshipped. Like Thor and Odin are not in the same mythology. Like the idea that Thor is Odin's son was something that pop culture made up
with the
recently.
with the Marvel
Yeah,
movies.
most
Yeah,
likely with the Marvel movies, yeah,
because
or even the comic
Thor's
books back in the day
yeah the
might have
comic
done it.
books, but the movies are what have drawn it in. Honestly,
Yeah,
I'll say those Thor movies have you know turned a lot of people into Nordic mythology
yeah.
fans.
So, but yeah, so Thor, he was like the supreme god of his own religion that was pretty dominant in like northern Germany, Denmark,
Hmm.
and then Odin was the he was the supreme god of the Norse mythology in Norway, Sweden.
Norway.
And this book was also talking about another one that was, I think, more Germanic, kind of like the Netherlands area, but his name was Wotan.
I've heard Wotan.
And yep, same thing. Just like he was some like overarching like war god. But I like seeing like the differences in them, and I just thought it was really fascinating. Norse mythology is cool, but I don't want to dive too deep into it because I don't want to become a fanboy. I feel it in me. It's in me.
Yeah,
and
like
it's coming
where
out.
all of a sudden you have like rune tattoos
Yeah.
and you start growing your hair out and braiding it.
Yep.
Too bad you can't grow a beard very long.
Yep.
Yeah, the Viking, like, I get it if it's in your heritage, like, being like, oh, that's cool. But, like, to be a fan of Vikings, like, I mean,
It's cringy.
the show Vikings glamorizes what Vikings actually did.
Dude, I agree, man.
Because, and that's the same with pirates. They do it to pirates. And honestly, what war group didn't do some shady things, like, back in the day? When you fought for land and you fought for a place, you did some fucked up shit.
Yeah.
But I mean, raping and pillaging and
it wasn't just like, but here's the distinction between the Vikings and like regular war crimes of raping and pillaging. The Vikings, their entire economy, that was what they were doing. Like, they didn't build they built ships for themselves. They didn't like have crazy exports or anything. Their main staple in their economy was rape, pillage, plunder.
Yeah, and women were property. Like, they were pretty much...
Some were. That's another misconception too. The Vikings right now, they're renowned for they had the best rights for women. That's why they have shield maidens. Women were very respected in the household. But they were a slave society nonetheless. So some women, yes, if you were a free woman, you did have pretty good rights in the Norse culture. But if you're a slave, like, they had slaves.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of slaves. So if you're a slave, you're fucked.
But they had men and women slaves, right?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't...
Yeah. But yeah, that's... Going back to what you were saying, they definitely glamorize it so much, and I'm like, if you actually knew the Vikings, you wouldn't be pumped on them. You'd be like they're akin to ISIS of their time. They were terrible people.
Well, like, they do that now, too, with, like, serial killers.
Yeah.
In, like, movies and shows and that kind of stuff, is they pick a good-looking actor and they make him charming. And I get that there's a purpose to it. There's a purpose to show you that, like Ted Bundy was actually a charming individual. And it's to show you how he was able to, like, get access or get trust from people. And he was charismatic and stuff. I get when it's that, but they did it with, like, Jeffrey Dahmer and, like, other things too. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, why are people like... I love murder stuff. Like, I do enjoy watching it and stuff, but I don't get the glamorization of it.
Yeah.
Or, like, shows that have a fictional serial killer, but they make him, I don't know, like, they make him, like, the main character that you're like, wait, why am I rooting for this? Or he's just misunderstood. Yeah. Or, like, I don't get that. And pirates, too. Pirates, just as bad as the Vikings. Like,
yeah, terrible people.
Terrible.
This is a comedian I like.
The stories are cool, but...
I think it's Shane Gillis. He's like, he says that he has the same take on it. He's like, pirates sucked. He goes, that was just a boat of rapists. That's all that was. Yeah. Like,
I get that there's cool history and everything. There's cool history in, the Vikings, the pirates, what were we just... serial killers. There's cool history to it.
Yes. So, kind of doubling back to the, like, all of the different Viking religions, and you actually mentioned something. We talked briefly about oral traditions. So, unlike Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology that have, like, a lot of documented text, Norse mythology didn't actually start getting written down until Christianity had taken over. So, in this book, a lot of the stories, they're by a guy named Snorri, who was Icelandic. And in Iceland, he wrote about all of the old religions that he knew about at the time. So he had like a lot of scriptures and stuff from it. But a lot of it was really difficult because one, it was almost completely orally told.
Yeah,
The
word of
Vikings
mouth.
didn't have many people that could write. So a lot of it wasn't written down, so it was a lot of like being passed down and things changing and whatnot. But also because he was writing it in a Christian society, there's also speculation too, because a lot of the stuff that he's writing makes it seem like there's parallels to Christianity.
Like he was influenced by?
Yes, but it was also like I think a part of it was him trying to justify, because he had to justify why he was writing it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, he would have been like trialed for
I don't.
as being like a heretic.
Yeah.
So I think he baked a lot of like there was a lot of stuff like that you couldn't say against the church that he had to like bake into the mythology that probably wasn't true.
And going back to it is when stories are told word of mouth, over and over again, details change.
Yep. A fun I wouldn't say this is a conspiracy theory, but a fun theory that I've heard is that Norse mythology started as Christianity.
Mm.
And because Norse mythology, like this, it was really big. This type of mythology was big like 600 to 800 BC.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that Jesus was born, Christianity became popular, during the year like 1 to like 200. And that missionaries actually made it to Norway and converted a bunch of people up in Norway back in those times. But then they left, they went back to the Middle East and left them to their own devices to pass that same story of Jesus down again and again and again and again. And then it just morphed into Norse mythology. Mm. And the biggest supporting theory of that is there's a lot of parallels between Odin and Jesus. Mm. So they think, and yeah, they think that maybe. But there's also, that's how they converted a lot of the Norse too, was they kind of convinced the Norse that their gods were the Christian gods.
Yeah.
So that could just be like remnants of that as well.
Not to revert back to Greek mythology, but the thing I like about Greek mythology is that their gods were not flawless.
Yeah.
Their gods were like, I mean, just look at Zeus. Like, dude, he's an adulterer. He's, cheated on his wife. He's
fucking everything.
Yeah.
Dude.
Everything, Yeah. Women, monsters. But, and I just like that because none of the gods are flawless. Like, every single one of them.
Has
like,
flaws,
honestly, the probably most well-behaved god that they have is Hades.
I know. Yeah, like Hades.
He's pretty mild in comparison to what Poseidon did, to what Zeus did.
That's also another thing too, is the influence of Christianity on a lot of these religions. Mm-hmm. Was a lot of these places, which I'm suspecting Greek mythology was one of them. The underworld, like the place that's where you went when you died, wasn't necessarily a bad place. It was just spooky because it was associated with death. But it wasn't necessarily bad. Mm-hmm. And it was really a lot of like the Christian influence that made, in their depiction of hell as like a bad place. Yeah. That kind of put this, put this perception on Hades or the underworld. Yeah, because
Hades was more of like a keeper of souls.
Yes.
But it wasn't like he was taking their souls. It was like to take care of them in the afterlife or whatnot. It's fascinating. The way other things can influence mythology.
What was the Roman variation of Hades?
I believe Romans went with planets, right? So
yeah.
I'm assuming it'd be a planet. Neptune was the equivalent to Poseidon.
Yeah.
That's what I know.
I believe Pluto was the equivalent to Ares.
Do you Google it?
Jupiter was the equivalent to Zeus.
Jupiter, really? Yeah. Huh. I want to say it was Mercury or Mars or something.
I know Venus was Athena.
Bippity boppity, give me the stuffity. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So Apollo
is
recognized as the god of archery, music, and dance. Apollo. Yeah, interesting. Mars was actually the god of war and agricultural guardian. So that's more.
So that's Ares. That's more.
Well, Ares or Athena, because she was Athena's known for agriculture. Jupiter was the god of sky and thunder.
Yep, so that was Zeus.
Venus was beauty, desire, sex, fertility. So that's Aphrodite.
Oh, Aphrodite. Yep.
Minerva is for Athena. Minerva. That's cool. Bacchus is winemaking, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness. I am not seeing Pluto.
Pluto. Oh, okay. So it was Pluto.
It was Pluto.
Pluto was
But
the Roman adaptation.
It sounds
of Hades.
like even in Roman mythology, he was referred to as Hades a lot.
Oh, okay.
So that's why it was kind of hard to find at first. But Pluto.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I like flawed gods.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh. And I also like in Greek mythology that every god has a purpose and like something they do that makes sense for why the world goes round. You know? Instead of it being one person who makes everything.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I find it's fascinating because, okay, you have, thunder and lightning. You're like, oh, what's Zeus up to? Or, agriculture's Athena, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't know that. They know her as, goddess of war. And, she was actually the more strategic part of war. Whereas Ares is like the war god.
Yeah, like the battle god.
But she was like the strategy person. Are you serious?